This
uh,
conference will now be recorded.
Webinar. It is how to hire and train an apprentice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sally Carruthers. I am the President CEO of True Union. Do apologize. I thought I had got rid of that writing on the bottom, but it's going to continue. Um, anyway, just a couple of housekeeping items. I usually try and keep these webinars to an hour. I pretty much have kind of got that down pat. This one is there was a lot of information to put in here, and I have not covered everything. Some things I'm just going to run over very quickly. The more I dug into this, the more I realized there is so much that goes into training an apprentice. And all of you know that you've been through it yourselves. Certainly the apprentice part. So if I do miss something, I apologize. Um, everybody is on mute. And so what we kind of do is wait till the end. I have my email address. If you want to contact me, if you have any questions or anything, please just go ahead then and we'll move on. So I want to start with a definition of apprentice. I actually don't like the word apprentice. This definition, I think it's from Webster's. I'm not quite sure, Mary, I can't remember. But one who's learning by practical experience under skilled workers, a trade, art, or calling. Well, I think that misses out on what we do. I think that appraising is a profession. It's not a trade. It involves a lot of education, but obviously there is an experience part of it. And I think sometimes we do overestimate that and get caught up in that as far as moving someone along to qualifications, but we can talk about that later. So remember, we are a profession. So I take it if you guys are on this webinar, you might actually be thinking about hiring an apprentice. So, there's some decision making there to do and some questions. So let's move through some of those. Do you have a need? Are you finding that you're working, all hours of the day, you have no time for your family, or you want to expand your business? Sometimes you have someone who approaches you and says, hey, I'd like to be an appraiser. You know this person, you have a lot of trust in that person. It may be a family member. And you think, well, maybe it's time to bring on an apprentice, and maybe this person will be the right kind of person. Many of you have been absolutely bogged down with work over the last couple of years. And so you are, you need some way to be able to remain afloat, I guess, working. And you think that having another set of hands in your practice will be able to help that. Some of you have the idea that you want to, pay forward in the profession. It's been good to you. You are concerned with the current appraiser capacity issues that we have, and you think that would be a good idea. But one of the big questions is always, can you afford it? So we're going to discuss some of these. These are all the things that go into the decision-making part of hiring an apprentice. So let's look at, as far as I can see, some of the advantages and then some of the disadvantages. There is the definite side of this that if you hire an apprentice or an assistant, you're making a step towards growing your company. You're adding another employee, and with that, some support. And if you can make that sustainable or even scalable, you may be able to grow your company in quite a large way. Sometimes this will allow you to add some product and client diversity. You may have residential clients, but you really want to concentrate on your commercial practice. And so you kind of would like to have an apprentice who can do some of that, or vice versa. Or perhaps you want to personally kind of move away from doing lender work and do some legal stuff or whatever it is, and hiring someone else helps you to do that. And it will hopefully provide some help and assistance. And especially as you take kind of chunks of what you do and you train someone on that, and then they're able to fulfill some of that for you. It takes it away from you. I think it allows you to perhaps increase volume, especially when an apprentice or multiple apprentices are up and running. You can probably take on a little bit more volume and kind of mitigate some of the capacity issues you've had before. For many of you, the consideration of, I'm sorry, for some reason that screen went. The consideration of taking on an apprentice is for succession. Like many of us, our profession is not getting any younger, and we're looking at what's going to happen in the future if you want to, take a long weekend, go on vacation, maybe retire. Who's going to take over your business? So often a thought. You want to stop up working long hours. I'm sure that's many of you. So I can see that that would be a good idea. And there's no doubt that bringing in somebody can often encourage some fresh ideas and new thinking. And we all need that in our business. So that is one of the advantages of bringing on an apprentice. Some of the disadvantages, what it's going to cost you. Whether you can make enough, to sustain that, you have to do the math, and we'll talk about that. But there is an additional cost. You may not have a suitable work environment. I hate to say that many of you are kind of cramped in the basement area. You got to think about that, and you just may not be able to make it work because of the environment that you work in. So that's something to think about. Time is going to take time. It really is time and patience, I should say. You're going to need to kind of donate time for it. You may, in some cases, have inadequate support from your clients. As an AMC, we always encourage appraisers to bring on apprentices, and we'll accept work done by assistants, but some clients will not. And maybe you don't have the product mix to give somebody a really round kind of training. You may just do desktop appraisals or drive-by appraisals, or you may just do one kind of residential work and you're not giving them enough. You don't have that product mix to be able to do it. You may not be able to support a payroll model. We're going to talk that you cannot hire an apprentice as an independent contractor. By definition, if you have an apprentice or an assistant, you are supervising them. So the IRS is not going to accept that you take on somebody as an independent contractor. And the last thing you want is an audit, and we'll talk about that. Many of you may have concerns about liability. Many appraisers are, we're perfectionists. We want to make sure that it's our work, and if we're handing over part of it to someone else, that could be liability issues. And then there's some concerns over sustainability. Right now, things are really good, but do you want to turn around and have to let someone go if your work decreases? So some of these things to think about. And then with that, I think the financial side is really important. Is it financially feasible to bring on an apprentice? The first thing to understand is that an apprentice is not an indentured servant. It's not free labor. You have to pay an apprentice, even more so than maybe when you guys got qualified. Many of them are college grads. They're expecting to earn a certain amount of money, and so it is not a free service. You really have to think about that. Also, one thing I think is a good idea, and we do this in our business, is to calculate your cost per order. So it's all very well saying, hey, I get paid $400 for an appraisal. But how much of that $400 dollars is actually profit, or after you pay for all your office, your overhead, your data, your software, everything else. What out of that $400, is profit? And out of that $400, what can you give out for an assistant? How much can you give? So yes, you may increase your work capacity, but you have to look at how much of that $400 is going to go, or $450, or whatever it is can actually go to pay for an apprentice. And with that, think about how much you're setting aside for capital expenditure. There are things that you're going to have to pay for in the future. You're going to need a new car. You're going to need maybe a new computer or printer, or whatever it is. There's some capital expenditures to do. Look at what you want as a target profit. And with that, I don't know, I hope that people are putting together a budget to determine where they're going to be, hopefully in 12 months' time. And then if you are bringing on an apprentice, to make that scalable, you probably want to increase your workload. And how much do you have to invest in sales and marketing to make that happen? With the overall kind of indication, can you afford an apprentice? Can you actually afford them? So I think some, go into your Excel spreadsheet and really starting to look at some numbers is very important in this, and looking at the feasibility, the financial feasibility of bringing on an apprentice. So appraiser assistant compensation, you may be at a loss on here. How much do we pay them? Well, the first thing to know is that most are going to be college graduates, not all, but at least they've done some form of college. Otherwise, they're not going to get qualified. And you cannot pay them as independent contractors, so they've got to be done on a payroll basis. You're going to have to do withholdings and set that up with your accountant. Having said that, you can pay them a fee split. You can pay them hourly, you can pay them an annual salary, whatever you want to do. Then there may be some consideration for vacation, benefits, that kind of thing. Remember, people are going to have those kind of expectations when they start working. Best advice is to talk to your accountant. Figure out what the best way to do this is before you even start doing anything. So you've decided that you can afford this. You've talked to your accountant. Everybody's excited about this, but where do you find the right candidate? Many of you actually might have the right candidate, or one that you think is going to be the right candidate just because they're in the family. This is the kind of succession model that out of all your kids, one of them would be an excellent appraiser. Or you have, I don't know, a nephew or a wife or whatever it is, husband that is looking, to do semi-retirement and will become a good apprentice for you. If not, I would say another good route to finding your right candidate is to go to your state appraisal board. They will have a list of all the assistants that have done their education and passed their state exam to become an appraiser assistant. So they have those. They consult them via county, area, and you can find some suitable candidates to reach out to you from the state appraisal boards. One thing I, always say is, when you're interviewing that person, and if they are somebody you don't know, interview them in the field, take them out for a day and make sure that they really want to do this and that they're comfortable with it, because they are going to spend a lot of time with you and probably a lot of time sitting in the passenger seat of your car. So make sure that everybody's kind of comfortable. Some people, when you're looking for an assistant, will look for someone with prior experience or qualifications. They could have been an apprentice before, or got here the realtor or not. I don't know what you guys all think about realtors. It's maybe a good question, but some people look at getting someone who has worked in the field, at least understands markets, and that is a good thing about a realtor. They probably will understand somewhat how the markets are, but they might have picked up some really bad habits too. So be very careful of that. College degree or not, again, some college is going to be required anyhow. I have a saying, and this is kind of particular to me, that I actually say that, when I hire people, I can teach them the math. The math is pretty straightforward in appraisal work, unless we get into some very complex kind of commercial stuff. But most of the math is fairly straightforward. But what is very difficult to teach is the ability to write, to communicate, and communicate successfully. And I think that is taught a lot in college classes. I always think that somewhat is the breaking point or the difference between college educated and high school educated people, just that ability. Now, that's not true of everybody or whatever. It's just that's a personal belief. I may be wrong. And it's also, I tend to kind of think that liberal arts are probably better than business because of that reason. The math is pretty straightforward. I also want to encourage, and I think any conversation about apprentices at this time or assistants, I think we have to address appraiser diversity. We have done an absolutely horrible job in our profession of encouraging diversity. We have very few minorities in the appraisal field. We are still heavily white male, elder white male dominated. There are, of course, more women, but many of our minorities are not represented. And I think we have to encourage that. And I think there will be a big push for that moving forward to encourage appraiser diversity. So I want to bring that up and make, ask you to consider that moving forward. So there is a qualifications criteria, as you know. The AQB of the Appraisal Foundation sets a criteria for licensed and certified. It is a minimum criteria, and of course, each of the states add their own little bit to it. So most states, their actual criteria varies. It has to meet the minimum, but obviously they add a little bit. I got several appraisal licenses in different states, and they all have little bits that are different, and one I have to have a fair housing class, and another I think a state law class, another a sexual harassment class. There's all kinds of different things that they add on. So you probably need to go and look at what those qualifications are. Of course, you are going to take somebody who has taken the classes and passed the exam and has their appraiser's license, because the clock starts on experience once they have that. None of their experience is going to be matter until they have actually got that assistant's license. One of the questions is whether that apprentice wants to get licensed or certified. It is fairly much easier right now to get licensed. And I think you're probably looking at just over a year of experience now. And the advantage of that is that you can then upgrade it to certification. So there's a certain amount of independence with that licensing level. So, so maybe it's just a stepping stone towards certification. And of course, you are going to have to take a supervisor's class with your apprentice. That is online. You'll take it separately, but you have to take and pass that in order to be able to supervise your assistant. There are some other requirements, so you might want to check with your board to ensure that you meet those qualifications as a supervisor. And as I said, I think the states are different on each one. So we've done all that, you've got somebody, pick someone, you're going to set up an office. The first thing, are they going to work remotely with you in your office? I mean, remotely independent of you, or are they going to work in your office setting? And I think it's very important that you provide a comfortable and safe environment for your apprentice. I think this is one of the big drawbacks, quite honestly, in the growth of our profession, that we have to a large extent become somewhat of a cottage industry, and many of us work in our offices within our house, and we don't have the means in order to bring on somebody, and they don't feel comfortable. So it's not like hiring someone into a corporate environment. You're hiring someone in, I guess, into your living room almost, and do people feel comfortable in that? Of course, I think the movement towards remote and independent offices helps a lot. There are a lot of tools that you can use if your apprentice is going to work remotely. One of the biggest things that we use internally, and I would highly advise you use, is Microsoft Teams. It allows you to chat to each other very easily throughout the day, share screens, be able to kind of literally kind of, it's like working next door to each other, even though you could be many, a big distance between you. With that, you have to make sure that your apprentice has access to data services. They might have to join the MLS, whatever needs to happen as far as your data services, and that they have the right equipment. Whether you provide it, they provide it, whichever you want to set up. A computer, phone, tablet, camera, whatever they need, printer, anything they need. And then you're going to have to figure out their software too, their appraisal software and any other. But the most important thing is that you allow this full communication both ways, that your apprentice at any time can ask a question. If they don't know, they ask a question, and you can go back and talk to them. It's just incredibly important. And there are ways to do it. I put up their Microsoft Teams. That's not the only way, by the way. You can use Zoom or anything else. And, I think we've been incredibly, one thing that's come out of the pandemic has been the ability to share information when people are in independent areas, and essentially the remote working and learning, and we can do that quite easily. So another thing I always advise is talk to your insurance agent. You're going to, you have to get your apprentice onto your E&O insurance. So that needs to be done. You may need medical insurance. Maybe you have to do something with your homeowner's insurance, auto insurance, or anything else. So have a chat with your insurance agent and make sure that you've got adequate coverage to protect you and your company and your practice. So we've hired someone, we've got everything set up, the office is set up. What you can do the first few weeks, or even months. I think that there are some very basic foundations that this apprentice has got to have, and some of that has actually been codified into state requirements. There are some states that require an inspection with a certified appraiser, with an apprentice, and that there's some kind of bonding between them for weeks or months. So check with your state on what the requirements are. But I am a huge believer, and I'm sure that everybody would agree, on shadowing. An apprentice is going to learn a lot by seeing what you do. So probably for the first few weeks or months, this apprentice is going to shadow you. Everywhere you go, they're going to go. They're going to see what you do, how you inspect a house, how you measure it, how you inspect comparables, how you write your reports, what you do, your processes, and all that kind of thing. So shadowing is very much very important. Obviously, they're going to learn the basics: how to inspect, how to measure, how to identify deferred maintenance, how to identify site issues, whatever it is. I think, and again, shadowing. And one thing, you have to teach them how to take a photograph. You would be surprised that people would not know how to take it's the interior photographs of the room for the best, to make sure that a client or intended user understands what's there. In all likelihood, you will have to, you're going to have them doing some research and analysis. The important thing is to get that analysis in there, but how to research, how to use data sources and that type of thing. It's not about necessarily at this point comparable selection or anything else, but it's just really getting familiar with those data searches and then being able to analyze things, understanding macro and microeconomic conditions. You're going to have them learn the software. This is brand new to them. They've never used WinTurtle or ACI or anything else. So very simple. They don't know how to put a photograph in. They don't know how to run a flood map. They don't know how to use a sketching program. There are many things that you do automatically that probably in the first few months you're going to have to teach somebody. And we haven't even really touched on any appraisal work here. This is all very basic stuff that has to be done. One of the major things I see and which is very difficult right up front, is understanding how to read a contract and be able to take out of that contract the important things: purchase price, concessions, closing date, parties involved. Is it a arm's length transaction? All the things that you do when you read a contract. I'd also spend some time having your apprentice learn how to read a set of plans and specs. Again, that's quite a difficult thing to do if you have never done that before. So I would think that that's a major thing. One thing you can do is also teach them to know the difference between price and value. And I would say actually add in there cost, price, and value. Many people come in thinking that the price, whatever is on that contract, is going to be the value. So teaching them some of these things is very important. And these are things that you're going to do basically in the first few months. Just some real basics. The other thing I think is very important early on is to spend some time with USPAP. These guys will have gone through a 14-hour USPAP class and passed an examination on it. That doesn't mean they understand the practical applicability of USPAP. And I think it's a very important thing to teach them. Any state action is going to be based on a USPAP violation, and I don't think USPAP is easy to understand if you've never done an appraisal. I don't think you understand who the client is and the intended user. That's very confusing. Some of the basics: scope of work, assignment conditions, physical characteristics, assignment results. Spend some time. Don't just kind of plonk the USPAP book in front of them, but let's start talking about practicality. How does that work inside your actual practice? How does USPAP working in your practice? How do you ensure? What kind of procedures do you have in place to ensure that you're adhering to it? They got to understand the practicality, the ethics rule, confidentiality. You can't just talk to anybody about assignment results. It's a huge one. Just understanding who the client is and that the homeowner is in all probability not the client. Understanding the competency rule and also understanding hypothetical conditions and extraordinary assumptions and the differences and how they work in your practice and how you use them in your practice. And probably in that shadowing of the first few months, you can probably have some examples of where you will be using those in your appraisals and in your appraisal reports. So some things that you're going to go through and teach and are very important for an assistant to learn. These are a lot of things that they may have some kind of education on, but the practicality of it, actual real world scenarios are very different. It's all very well to sit in your classroom or online whenever you do your appraisal classes and learn what a legal description is. Okay, you know, it's lot and block, it's meets and bounds, or whatever it is. But actually learning how to read a legal description and understanding that and then putting that legal description beside a plat map is incredibly important to learn. And unless you've ever looked at those, you're not going to understand how to do them. Physical assessments, just knowing what areas have those physical assessments, why, where they are, where to find them. All very well to know what a special assessment is in a classroom setting as opposed to real world. Property taxes, how to calculate them if you need to, where they come from, how they matter, where you can find them. I think that a new assistant would be very confused about the identification of neighborhood boundaries. Number one, why we have to do it, and number two, exactly what is a neighborhood, and you know, then number three, how do I actually define that, and then test it and make sure that it is applicable. It's a very important part of what we do, and we do it very early on in our process. And I think that's something that is incredibly important to teach an apprentice, and how to get that right. Probably related to those neighborhood boundaries is price patterns. If you are working, and as you're very familiar with, you know price patterns, appraisers know price patterns. You know when those patterns change. You know that one road can impact a value or a school district or whatever it is. And I think that's an important thing to teach on a very practical side where those are. Market forces, and again, they'll learn about economic, social, physical, governmental, but the practical side of that, when you go into your particular area of geographic competence, what are those forces impacting that area? Hey, you know, actually, I'm in Texas, and hey, they're bringing in Elon Musk, bringing in all his Tesla work. How does that impact, you know, your market? Or we just closed a factory here. What's going to happen here? They built a new school, or whatever it is that impacts on a practical side. These guys are learning this in a classroom setting, but putting it out there practically is very, very important. And particularly that knowledge has to come from you. It's not going to come from anyone else. So another thing I think that an individual may learn in a classroom setting, but I think the practical side of it is incredibly important, is the site considerations. I'm a firm believer, I would be kind of dumb if I wasn't, that the dirt that a property sits on is what influences value. It is absolutely the foundation of value, right? We all know that. We're working in it. I hate to hear that location, 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 but it's so important. And so site understanding, you know, I think everybody gets caught up in the property. Oh, it's 2,500 square feet, it's 2 years old, blah, blah, blah. But it's all about the actual dirt that the property sits on, and understanding that, understanding site considerations is very important. And it's something that many of us kind of learn from as we're practically working. And I think that it's something you have to impart. So location, you know, what is the importance of location for this particular site? View. It's all very well to say, oh, you know, I can see the lake, but can you really see the lake? And how is that really impacting value? Or yes, it does impact value. And you know, what is the importance of that? I kind of told the story in the last webinar I did about when I was an apprentice and back in England, and I was doing an appraisal on a golf course, and there weren't that many sales on the golf course, so I just thought I'll just go off and take some sales from different places. And I think I used one on the river, and I used one somewhere else, and handed my appraisal into my supervisor, and he kind of hit the roof because he said, the influence of value on this particular property is the golf course, and you need to, it's that particular site. And so he kind of taught me how I could find, even though there weren't sales, particularly on that golf course, I could find other sales, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not always the case. Maybe that's not a big part of it. But whatever it is, this is the kind of knowledge that you have to send over to or be able to impart to your assistant. Size, sometimes, and the size of a lot is not important. Sometimes it is. Shape, sometimes it's important, sometimes not. How do you recognize drainage issues or topography? What about easements and encroachments? How do you appraise a house with a shared driveway? I happen to live in a subdivision, a new subdivision, where the builder's kind of putting a lot of properties in with shared driveways. So I'm thinking, God, that's a nightmare for some of the appraisers. So anyhow, those kinds of things. Multiple parcels, there are specific ways that you have to address multiple parcels. And looking at whether they can be sold off independently, if they have their own individual highest and best use, are they contingent? All the things that you have to think about. Excess land, surplus land, and how you treat that, how you value it, how it's to be considered, and the impact of that. And then, very importantly, externalities. Everything impacts the value of a site. They can be positive or negative, but really being able to, for example, identify that being next door to a gas station is not really a good thing in most cases. So these are things, again, that you can teach in a classroom setting, but when practically speaking, they are very, very, very important to impart to your apprentice. So moving on from that is highest and best use. Now, we're talking residential properties here, but I think even on the residential side, there are absolutely cases of where highest and best use issues come up. And obviously you have to, consider highest and best use if you are coming up with market value, obviously. So with that, I think, and this kind of relates also to the site considerations. Again, they want to learn highest and best use. What are the four tests of highest and best use? And, probably can name that, but practically speaking, how does that work? First of all, how do you find out zoning? And, and how does zoning impact it? What if it's zoned, you got a single family residential property and it's zoned for multifamily, and how do I find out if it's compliant, and is it the highest and best use, and blah, blah, blah. Homeowners associations with that as far as the legal consideration. Physical considerations, all very well to say, oh, well, the highest and best use is for commercial, but it's sitting on a residential lot, that's 40 by 120. So, and then, feasibility and economic considerations. So practicality, hopefully, during the time that you have your apprentice, you will be able to kind of really look at some of these highest and best use issues and be able to kind of run them through them and be able to help them with that. So big part of what you're going to be doing. We've kind of got through the site, we've done highest and best use, but it's understanding construction and property descriptions. So, I'm talking residential here. This is not intended to be a commercial class, but, understanding residential house types, right? What is the difference between a bungalow and a colonial? What is the difference, between a contemporary and a Tudor? And just the different types of house house types, and there are books on that identify that. But important, with that, I kind of put that as the last thing here is conformity. You might have a contemporary home in the middle of a very traditional kind of neighborhood. How is value impacted? How, because of the lack of conformity. Obviously, building and site materials, and again, there are classes and things that people in classroom settings, but the actual practicality of learning how a property is constructed. With plumbing, electrical, energy efficient items, the impact of value of energy efficient items. Functional utility, when do we have a lack of functional utility? And again, kind of probably related to conformity too. Very important things to learn on a practical basis. Actual age versus effective age, practicality, again, looking at a property and saying, yeah, I know this property is 75 years old, but hey, it's being, remodeled and this, and this, and actually the effective age is 25 years. And how do I support that effective age opinion? Because that's an opinion. That's not actually a physical characteristic. It's an opinion. Quality and condition. Of course, we have great. I think that Freddie Mac did a wonderful job on coding our quality and condition. But understanding, I think appraisers still get this wrong. I know they get it wrong. C3 is not exactly average. I think that C4 is some kind of spread in for average, but anyway, I think understanding, how we actually code for quality and condition is very, very important. The practical observation of property defects, hugely important. To be able to identify something, bulging walls in the basement, cracks, damp, roof issues, whatever they are, lack of paint or, whatever it is that is a physical defect or deferred maintenance, and being able to understand the differences between them. And between what is a long-term physical depreciation and then deferred maintenance. Very important, and I think that's something that probably can only really be done, practically speaking, actually observing it and seeing what is going on. So those are some of the kind of basic things, well, not just basic, but learning some of them. And then some, our apprentice has got to get into the weeds now and start doing some calculations and start kind of really moving towards providing a value. In the end, they're going to be a valuer. They are going to be an appraiser. They are going to have to provide value. And so always we're moving towards those approaches to value and how to do those properly. I think it's extremely hard for people who have never done appraisals before to select comparable sales. I think it's the art in appraising. I think that it is it's the science in as well in appraising, and be able to understand what makes one property a really competitive alternative to the subject property. And that's what I think selecting comparable sales are. I have a real hard time when I review an appraisal and we've got a property, for example, that a subject property that may be around $150,000 home, and someone is choosing a comparable that's 300,000 or 400,000. I just don't think that that is going to have the same audience as the subject property. If you think about going out to buy a house, you've got for most people, you've got a loan commitment on a mortgage. There is a limit to that, and people looking at $150,000 homes are not the same people looking at $300,000 or $400,000 homes. It's very different. The same with kind of size. You want a 2,000 square foot, 3-bedroom home. That's not the same as a 1,000 square foot, 2-bedroom home. Unless there are other factors, and this is some of the stuff that you have to teach. Maybe the predominant part of that property is the acreage, or the view, or location on a lake or something. So these are the things and the nuances that you will be teaching your apprentice. I really hope I'm not putting you off all this. So with that, the applicable criteria for selecting comps, and research of sales. And then how do you verify those sales? How do you really know what the condition of those comparable sales are? Or if there were any circumstances that influence the sale price, how do you verify? Um, and when I talk about verification also, understanding you're under a time frame, and can you find a party who is able to give a discussion of that, or whatever you need to verify those sales. And then we come to the adjustments in the sales comparison approach. Now, you're not going to hand, I really hope you're not going to hand your assistant just a list of adjustments, right? Well, every time we have a fireplace adjustment, we make $1,500. And in the old days, I know that happened, but it's the hardest thing to how do you support that adjustment? Why are you making a $5,000 adjustment for a bathroom? Why are you making a $20,000 adjustment for condition? Where is that coming from? So teaching them about, whether you use regression analysis or paired sales or whatever you do, how are you supporting those adjustments, and how do you make them? And why do you make them, and what is the outcome supposed to look like? Understanding market conditions is huge. I see many appraisers just really kind of lazy on this. I'm sorry, I don't know, unless you're living underneath a rock, you don't have stable market conditions in the vast majority of our markets right now. We do have a lack of inventory. There is a limited supply of homes. That does not make for a stable market condition. A lot of areas have some appreciation in property values, and there are many places where marketing times are really short. So make sure that you really teach them about how those conditions work. Understanding concessions and adjustments for concessions, and then also how to reconcile your sales comparison approach. How are you, what sales are you relying on to really indicate where the value is, and why? Why are you doing that? So a lot to be done on the sales comparison approach. I think understanding the cost approach is very important as well. There are a lot of components that go into the cost approach. I think valuing the site that the property sits on is probably it is, again, I think, the foundation of your value. And you can know if you've gone wildly wrong if that site value is wrong. So understanding how to come up with a site value based on comparable sales, or even executing, understanding other methods of valuing land. And I think it's so important then to look at that value of that site in comparison to your final value, and where it will be, and why it is what it is. So site valuation is incredibly important. Accurate construction costs are important. These were kind of wavered over the last 12 months, so making sure you have the most recent accurate construction costs, whether it is Marshall & Swift or another cost service that you use. And then, practically speaking, being able to understand, the forms of depreciation you can have in a property, physical depreciation, the calculation of age life, functional depreciation, external depreciation, all those are really important. And the cost approach is a very important approach to value, especially when you've got newer homes. And understanding that and practically understanding it. And the main concept, the cost does not always equal value. And it doesn't always set the upper limit of value either. So especially in recent times. So I think that there's a lot of conversations and a lot of time that has to be spent on the cost approach. So finally, I think you're going to have to touch on the income approach. That's going to be a part of an assistant's qualifications. If they never do a multifamily, they're going to get questioned by the board. And also, I think residential rental markets are alive and well. There are a lot. And I think getting into the income approach and having a general understanding of it's very important. Understanding how to come up with a market rent, selecting comparable rentals, how calculating gross rental multipliers, and then understanding that gross rental multipliers are different in different markets and what is influencing those. So I think that it is a very important part of what we do, even on the residential side, and it's going to have to be included in your tuition of your apprentice, understanding that income approach. So finally, we're going to get to writing an appraisal report. I cannot underestimate how important this is, and how important it is that you carefully review the appraisal report written by your apprentice. It is going to be an indication of your work too. It may be that your apprentice merely put that they provided professional assistance and your name is on the report, or it may be that they're signing the report and you're signing it too. Either way, it is your report. It is still your report. And so it is extremely important that you go through that report with a fine-tooth comb. Sometimes I think there's no middle way. I have some appraisers who have apprentices, and it seems they don't even look at what the apprentice does. And then there's some that by the time we get them into our office, they're so perfect because I think they must have kind of really gone through them very carefully that it seems like there's no in between. But please remember that this is your report. Even though it may have been done from start to finish by an apprentice, by the time you're in the second year, you're perfectly confident in what they do. But it's your report. You are still supervising them. I cannot underestimate that enough. The report is to be clear, precise, and accurate. Clear, precise, and accurate. Most importantly, not be misleading. You can't contradict yourself. You can't kind of lead in one way and then go somewhere else. It's got to be, it has to be accurate, and it has to be not misleading. Ideally, it should be free of typos, misspellings, and grammatical errors. You'll be surprised how many misspellings, typos, grammatical errors we get in our office. And it's annoying, but also it reflects very poorly on you, the appraiser. And if your apprentice has a problem spelling or with grammar, it's going to reflect on you too. So also, question, do you want to sign it or don't you want to sign it? Sometimes that might be, you may rely on your, company for that. Whichever way it is, it's your report, doesn't matter. You could have your apprentice maybe signing it, and that is fine, or they may be providing professional assistance. Make sure they state what they're doing, and their name has got to be on that report for them to get credit for it. Again, it is your report. And that's totally up to you on your own practice, how you decide to do it. Be truthful. I can't underestimate. Don't, if you didn't inspect the property, say you didn't inspect the property. If you didn't inspect the comps, say you didn't inspect the comps. But I'm going to tell you the quickest way for you to get in trouble with your state board is if you mislead. If you say you saw that property and then the homeowner says, I never saw that person, and you're going to get caught. It's just the way it is. Someone's going to rat on you. That happens. I've had like some pretty dumb appraisers who, send their assistant in there, and their assistant's 30-year-old lady, and her name's nowhere on the appraisal report, and the you know the actual appraiser is a 60-year-old man, and his name is on the appraisal report. Someone's going to rat you out on that. So be careful on that. Make sure that you got the exposure time on there, and that your apprentice understands what exposure time is. There's nothing more at 9 than seeing that, all the comparable properties sold in under 10 days, and then someone's got an exposure time of 45 days. That's just not right. Make sure that your apprentice understands valuation scenarios, and the valuation scenario is part of your scope. And you will be asked, it's part of what you get asked to do. It's part of your assignment condition is your valuation scenario. I'm not going to get into that right now, but it's probably one of my pet peeves that people appraisers decide that they're going to themselves make up the valuation scenario. That's not your choice. Now, if you're doing an appraisal for Fannie Mae and you've got got issues that they state physical defects that should be considered and made a subject to, then that's, or FHA or whatever it is that is. But if someone tells you they want an as-is appraisal, it's got to be an as-is appraisal. And again, as I said, this is still your report. Never forget that. It's still your report. Some other considerations while we're at it, just finishing up. What point do you let an apprentice loose on an inspection? Again, that's up to you. It's up to your apprentice. There is no, there may be under some state requirements a set time that they state, but again, it's up to them. I would encourage independence, but with that, encourage questions. So it's good to have them working independently, but make sure when they get into any scenario, they ask questions. Always, always, always take photos. And one of the things I do encourage a lot is patience. I am personally someone that isn't blessed with a lot of patience. And so I often have a hard time. I have historically kind of had a hard time mentoring someone because I don't have a lot of patience. I have a lot of patience to teach a class, but not do the one-on-one thing. But it probably is the most important part of this process. Remember your liability. Very important when I say, be truthful and acknowledge this is your report. It always is. Make sure that you give them some diversity in product. Give your apprentice a chance to do condos, multifamilies, manufactured homes. And when I say about letting them loose and encouraging independence, I'm going to give you an example. I once hired a gentleman who had just qualified as an appraiser. He just finished and passed his exams and did his experience. He actually did his experience with what I consider one of the best appraisers in town. Did fantastic work. So this guy came to work for us, and And we sent him out, thinking, probably he should have some knowledge and be able to do it. Well, here's the thing: the guy had never, ever, ever done an appraisal on his own. I did not know this, and his supervisor turned out to be a very major control freak and had never allowed him any independence. And that was really sad. He was a very bright guy, but it was kind of like starting over again. And it was also sad to understand that about somebody that I had seen as having a lot of respect for, and that he could not really let go of someone and let them kind of have their independence. Um, and then they're licensed or certified. So what are the next steps? And do you want to keep them around, or are they going to go off on their own? Or, I'm not a person that believes you hold someone for the rest of their life. I don't believe in kind of, I don't know, non-competes and things like that. I think they, that I do see a lot of people that for years have incredible relationships with the people that mentor them or they mentor, and I think this can be an incredibly long, great relationship that does not necessarily end when someone is licensed or certified. So that is exactly 1 hour. This is my email address. Please contact me if you have any questions. And I thank every one of you for being here this morning and spending some time with us. Thank you.